Irwin, it's your 70th birthday, and so I would like to ask you to come up, please, and join me on stage here, because when it's your birthday, you do get a present, okay?
We have in Irwin Jacobs is an individual who is technically brilliant. He's incredibly innovative. He's business savvy. He's, I think you could say, undaunted by even the largest of odds when he believes he's right.
In addition to being brilliant and creative, there's a constructive aspect about everything he does. He is able to pull together bits and pieces of a problem and really put them into a solution to that problem and move forward on that solution. And I think in that sense, he is really quite unique.
He's always one or two steps ahead of everybody.
Irwin is, I think, the most ethical businessman I've ever known.
When many of us think of the ideal engineer that we would like to clone if we could in engineering schools, it's Irwin Mark Jacobs.
He is consistently ranked among America's most admired chief executives, but to San Diegans, Irwin Jacobs is much more. Father of the region's telecom miracle, his company logo imprinted on the city's football stadium, and together with his wife Joan, Jacobs is the city's most prolific philanthropist. More than 100 companies can trace their roots back to the first company that Jacobs built, and the digital wireless technology he championed is now the standard for third-generation cell phone systems around the globe. For all the superlatives, though, Irwin Jacobs remains remarkably grounded, even when announcing a $110 million donation to UCSD's Jacobs School of Engineering.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be able to make this type of a gift and to kick off or sustain this campaign. I think it is very, very important to the university, to the region, to the state, to the country. Very important time to continue to improve education throughout the country, to make sure that we are preparing leaders for the future, that we're educating students.
In October 2003, as the Qualcomm founder and CEO turned 70 years old, he participated in a UCSD symposium in his honor, attended by more than 500 faculty, students, colleagues, and friends from industry.
It's my pleasure to welcome you all here on behalf of the Jacobs School and our co-hosts, Qualcomm and the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology. This is a wonderful occasion as we are here to honor Dr. Irwin Mark Jacobs on his 70th birthday.
Speakers looked back at Jacobs' academic and business careers, as well as his impact on UCSD, San Diego, communications theory, and the wireless industry. A panel of international experts also looked ahead to telecommunications in the next 70 years.
I don't try to look 70 years ahead, but I do try to kind of think what might be happening over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe decade. And then, you know, is there good ways that perhaps if we do the job right, we can end up with some new products and continue to build a very good company. And so each year because sometimes people will come in and say, are there really any good things left to be done? And each year I feel confident saying, yes, there's yet another decade, and that decade luckily keeps moving out.
Irwin always understood that what you took in and what you paid out had to be different. There had to be something left over. And it was that kind of innate, there has to be something left over, that the bottom line is important, is one of the things that separates Irwin from a lot of would-be entrepreneurs, a lot of wonderfully trained technical people who are great technicians and lousy managers.
Harvey White, who has worked with Jacobs for more than 30 years, believes Jacobs learned that lesson from his father, who owned a restaurant, the Boston Beef Market, in the family's hometown of New Bedford, Massachusetts. In high school, the younger Jacobs played football and was a sports writer for the school paper, but also excelled at math and made honor society. Expecting to follow in his father's footsteps, young Irwin enrolled in Cornell School of Hotel Administration, but he quickly gravitated instead to electrical engineering.
I myself was very lucky, actually. Managed to get an excellent engineering education at both Cornell as an undergraduate, then at MIT as a graduate student. In the last term I was at Cornell, one of the last courses I took had to do with the technology of vacuum tubes. And the theory was great, but we also built some vacuum tubes. That hasn't been too useful. Luckily, though, while I was there, I also, of course, took a number of theoretical courses. This was after I left the hotel school and went over to engineering. Indeed, one of our products at Qualcomm had to do with putting a satellite terminal on a truck, using satellites that are not designed for mobile communication, they're designed for fixed communications. And so how do you design an antenna that will be small, be on a truck, be very reliable? And we sweated over that for quite a while. In fact, I think it was in a discussion trying to explain to financial person Harvey White what the problem was, that in fact the solution came up, and it was based on some things that had learned way back at Cornell in EM theory. So that's one of the reasons someone commented that I always stress that when you're at a university, taking the basic material is the critical part. And indeed, you can never tell where it's going to be useful, but often it's just what you need to make that additional step ahead.
Irwin Jacobs arrived at MIT for graduate school in 1956. He was immediately taken with the new theories of former Bell Labs mathematician Claude Shannon, who was then at MIT, theories that would eventually underpin the science and engineering of the digital communications revolution that Jacobs would harness. Robert Gallagher arrived at MIT that same year.
Both of us, when we got there, were struck by this wonderful, very hot field at that time, which was communication theory. Irwin was one of the few students there who really was torn between statistical communication theory and also this group in processing information, which in a sense was the newer thing at the time.
In 1959, Jacobs received his Ph.D. after completing a thesis that earned him a full-time faculty position at MIT.
So all the rest of us at that time were writing theses about the physical layer of communication. Irwin, as he has done many, many times since then, showed an eagerness to travel the less traveled path. And you know, this one was so beautifully organized and so beautifully put together that you could sit there and read it and be fascinated by it and say, gee, that's really interesting, it's really neat stuff.
Even then, as Gallagher highlights while reading from the thesis, Jacobs was taken with the concept of communication networks.
A probabilistic graph is a linear graph in which both nodes and links are subject to random erasure. Such a graph may be thought of as an idealized model of a communication network.
From 59 to 1966, Jacobs was on the faculty at MIT.
Irwin at that time, being encouraged to go into practical things, went into taking over some labs, teaching laboratories, teaching an undergraduate course in communication, doing consulting at Sylvania and at Lincoln Lab on very new and interesting communication systems. The most interesting thing he did at that time, and the thing which has lasted the most, is the book. It was called Principles of Communication Engineering.
Co-written with fellow MIT professor Jack Wozencraft, the book grew out of class notes that the two wrote for a course in communications engineering.
Lots of books are called principles. Very, very few are. This, in fact, was a book on the principles of communication. It is still the Bible of many, many very good communication engineers. Perhaps most good communication engineers regard this as the true way of looking at communication systems. They took the best part of information theory, the best part of the new parts of communication theory, put them all together into something which could be called an engineering textbook. And I claim that all of the things that Irwin has done since then, if you look at the major systems he's been the architect of since then, and you look at the various pieces of them, all of them come from this inordinately deep appreciation he had of what all this theory was all about.
For all these decades, the theory has held good. And Irwin's book, Principles of, held good for decades. I mean, that's incredible in a textbook. The rise of wireless aided very much by Qualcomm and Irwin, has kept communication theory alive.
In 1964, Jacobs began planning a sabbatical from MIT and explored possibilities on the West Coast. A fellow communications theorist, Andrew Viterbi, was part of a very active group at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena during the heady days of the space program.
He asked me whether there was a position that might be available, and so I passed on the word with obviously a very strong recommendation, and then Human Resources followed up the application and sent him a rejection letter. We rapidly straightened that out, and Irwin spent a very productive year, and that certainly whetted his appetite for a permanent position in the West.
A former professor at Cornell, Henry Booker, was hiring faculty for the University of California's new campus in San Diego.
Henry Booker was a professor of electromagnetic theory. He was the one who came to UCSD to start what was then called the Department of Electrophysics, and which became now electrical engineering, computer engineering. But I took a very good course in EM theory from him, and he gave lots of insights into there's lots of equations, and you can do great calculations on, well, sometimes you can, sometimes you have to simulate it, but there's a lot of very good theory there, but he gives you a very good feeling for it, a gut feeling for what can be done, what can't be done. And so that's lasted ever since.
Jacobs visited the campus in La Jolla and got an offer to join Booker's department, but then
He turned down the offer from UCSD for about a week and then changed his mind.
He and Joan went back to Boston and said, no, they're too deeply involved in things there. But then it snowed very hard that winter, and they remembered the invitation and called up to say, hey, is that still on? I'm very glad it snowed that winter in Boston.
That, of course, was a very exciting time. What was one of the reasons for making the decision, and it was a complicated decision back and forth, but just the opportunity to participate in founding well, it wasn't quite founding, but the very early days of the new school. It was 2 years after I came that the first undergraduate class, and most of those had come as 2 years, some from transferred in from elsewhere.
It was UCSD that brought Irwin and Joan to San Diego almost 40 years ago, and we were lucky to have Irwin on the engineering faculty during the university's formative years.
We came here in 1966. The campus was very small. It was kind of fun, though, in that being small, you help recruit all the new faculty in all the departments. It wasn't just one department that you were involved with. When you gave courses, faculty as well as students from the various courses, other departments came in to listen. And so it was a very nice community. It also gave us a chance to watch it grow and indeed watch it just continually improve in excellence.
Jacobs recounts a fateful evening in 1966 when he and Joan were invited to the home of one of UCSD's founders.
We went to a party at Harold Urey's home, and he found out I was an electrical engineer, and he pulled me to the front windows, and he looked out, and there were all these wires running across, and he said, "Can't you do something about those?" I never at that time imagined that several years later I could at least eliminate some of those wires. So you can never tell how these things finally do close a circle.
Jacobs joined the Department of Applied Electrophysics. It was clear from the start that he was interested in much more than just theory and grasped the importance of computer engineering.
The department he joined had grown out of a physics orientation. It was really applied physics and also space physics. And Irwin came, and he knew at that point that there was a great future in computers. And he indeed developed a number of courses in computers, and he, including laboratory courses.
I've been, during consulting times, learning a bit about microprocessing and the capabilities with microprocessors and different things you might do with them. Decided, well, let's bring that to the campus, set up a laboratory where we could build some hardware, electronics, and also then interface with a logic computer, program it, and be able to do all kinds of interesting things. Perhaps the same kind of aspects now with the phones, where you get that and you can now put software into it, but in this case it was microcoding. Of course, a read-only memory then was a big box with, I don't know, a few hundred kilobytes at best, probably less than that. And so one had to be awfully careful in designing the code to go into it. But it really did open up lots of ideas and ways to move ahead.
These courses later became central to the curriculum of every ECE department throughout the country. But I have a feeling he had a little bit of a hard time getting them accepted with this department as it stood. This was the department during one of the years that Irwin was here, and some of them are still on the faculty at UCSD. It's easy to find Irwin. He always stands out in a crowd.
In his lab courses, Jacobs was sowing the seeds of a later career outside of academia, seizing on two central observations about the intersection of computing and communications.
The courses that Irwin was introducing at UCSD became central to the success of the companies he led. I think Irwin was one of the very, very early people to understand how microprocessors can be used in engineering. There's two aspects of it that I think are easily understood. One is if you build equipment that's based upon a microprocessor, you can start building the equipment before you have your system designed. Because what you do is you build it, this microprocessor, which if you don't know is just a tiny computer that's in your equipment, can sit there, and then when you finally decided what you wanted to do, you can load a program into it. Perhaps more interesting and more important is that you can change the equipment as time progresses, and you can have the next generation simply by downloading a new program into it. And indeed, many of the products that Linkabit and then Qualcomm developed were based upon this strategy, which was very new at the time.
Jacobs began doing outside consulting while holding down his faculty position at UCSD, and for some of his earliest consulting work, he teamed with his old friend from JPL, Andrew Viterbi, who by then had left Pasadena for a faculty position at UCLA.
Well, we did some consulting projects together, and that's really what got Linkabit started. The original office was on the fringe of the UCLA campus, in a very small former dentist's office. We moved it down to the Sorrento Valley in roughly June of 1970.
By 1971, Jacobs had to make a difficult decision: remain at UCSD or take over full-time running of Linkabit, which was jointly founded with Viterbi and another UCLA professor, Leonard Kleinrock. He opted for the career in industry.
I don't believe that people foresaw at that point Linkabit becoming so important and then becoming sold itself, and then him coming back again after that, and with Andy Viterbi co-founding Qualcomm and becoming the success. I think Irwin had no doubt, but I don't think the other faculty member envisioned anything like that.
Irwin, I believe, came on full-time in '71, and I moved down. Things had grown so large, we had all of 40 employees by '73. I felt duty-bound that I had to participate more on a full-time basis as opposed to coming down once a week.
Martha Dennis was an early recruit at Linkabit.
That it was really a family affair. One felt like your family belonged there because for sure Irwin's family was there. Irwin had his father employed giving out the coffee, cocoa, and chicken soup. Very important part of the diet. And he had his brother-in-law running the factory, and his wife, Joan, would cook up and dish out the hamburgers at the company picnics. Even when there were hundreds of employees, she was still doing it, which was pretty impressive.
Linkabit was profitable from the first year on.
And Linkabit also was able to do the two things in the delivery of video and data that today are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And they came out of the group of scientists at Linkabit, and clearly out of Irwin's leadership and many times out of his personal contribution to those things. And today, the business of scrambling over-the-air video signals, and of all those little dishes that you see around the world that send satellite information on the sides of buildings at Linkabit, created that business.
We had given them at Linkabit a contract to build to show that you could actually put a sequential decoder on a chip. And I had no doubt that they would be able to do that, but the reason I mention it is because I believe it put the notion of fabless development into the psyche of all the people that we're dealing with.
Jacobs and Linkabit also played a critical role in extending the precursor of the Internet across the Atlantic Ocean, putting it on the path to becoming a truly World Wide Web.
You all know that there are many, many fathers of the Internet, more than you can count on hands and toes. But Irwin played a very key role in that, and I just wanted to describe that. While he was at Linkabit, I was this is a kind of a flip and rolls, I was building a packet radio system. Nothing that could ever have become commercial, because these were cubic foot, they cost about $300,000 each in today's parlance. Not something you could ever sell. But we wanted to link the European community, and Irwin volunteered to sort of organize and make a packet satellite net real. So he ran a working group that actually formed that. I participated, but I was sort of a member of his working group, even though I was funding the activity. And my one contribution to that, other than at a management level, was doing the international tariffs. Irwin did everything else to make that technically real.
We both went over together to take a tour throughout Europe, visit all the various, we'll call PTTs at the time, but the telephone companies, and tell them about packet communications and why they should participate in this project. It varied with the different PTTs how long it would take before they threw us out. Some would serve us lunch, others wouldn't even take that long. Luckily, we did find a few research laboratories and universities that did participate.
That plus the packet radio net and the ARPANET were the three components of the initial internet. So the fact that we had an internet to even experiment with is in large part due to Irwin's help on that.
I think one of the troubles with the universities is they've never seen how theory and practice work hand in glove together. What I love about Irwin is the way that he's always seen this, the way that he's always done it. He doesn't talk about it, but he just naturally figures out how to take a theoretical viewpoint and use it in what he's actually doing.
Linkabit was a place that really bridged the academic industry boundary, which in the 70s was still a boundary. Today it doesn't exist, of course, but you were as likely to see a faculty member, say in communications theory, in an office at Linkabit as you would see him on the UCSD campus. So there was a real path back and forth. And Linkabit was really at the forefront in creating that kind of relationship and utilizing that kind of talent as well.
Linkabit grew 50% a year for 15 years and made money every year.
In 1980, Jacobs agreed to sell Linkabit to a high-tech conglomerate, Macom, but stayed on as CEO. After a second merger and a change in management at the parent company, he left in April 1985.
The next day, my husband and I sent him a check for $100, I think, to get his mayoralty campaign started, because we thought if he's this good, he'd be great for the city.
Weeks later, with Viterbi and 5 other ex-Linkabit executives, Jacobs founded Qualcomm as a company with only one product to sell, the founder's expertise.
I do remember the very first contract we ever got at Qualcomm. In fact, I'm proud that I actually created that sale. It was for $1,200, and it was for Irwin to consult. Linkabit was like the prelims to the main event. It was the foundation, or to put it in more technical terms, it was the test bed. It was the test bed of the technology and the test bed of the management skills that became the hallmark of Qualcomm. And those same dedication, those same basics that applied at Linkabit are what applied and were successful at Qualcomm?
There was a wealth of talent that had been developed in San Diego, largely through Linkabit had grown quite large to about 1,500 people. And they were all anxious to continue to work with Irwin and myself. And there were opportunities. Amusingly, the first office was no better than our first office. It was off of Villa La Jolla Drive, above, I think, a cleaning establishment. But that only lasted about 3 months, and we had already leased space on Sorrento Valley Road.
Before long, Jacobs and his colleagues began to hone in on a business model that hinged on development of a wireless technology that originated with the military called Cdma, Code Division Multiple Access, a spread spectrum technology using coding techniques to allow many more users to use the same frequency, whether voice or data traffic.
The military version existed, I think, during World War II already, so it would have been the 40s, and certainly much more strongly in the 50s and 60s. Most satellite communications, for the Army at least, was direct sequence. So we had a lot of experience actually in both versions of Cdma.
Unlike Linkabit, which relied almost exclusively on federal contracts from the Department of Defense and NASA during its first 10 years, Qualcomm decided to focus on potential commercial markets for Cdma. But Cdma for cell phones was not yet on the drawing board. Instead, Qualcomm was approached by entrepreneur Alan Salmasi, who had a blueprint for creating a satellite network for trucking companies. He needed Jacobs and his team to develop a workable and affordable system for the satellite service.
He was our first commercial customer, and although at first it didn't look too realistic, largely because of the lack of financing, as time moved on, it became more and more real, mostly because of the product of the very talented group we had. And ultimately that became the OmniTrax system.
Qualcomm perfected the technology, purchased Salmasi's company OmniNet in 1988, and that same year launched OmniTrax, which went on to revolutionize transportation logistics. The satellite mobile communication system allows transportation companies to maintain real-time data communications with their trucks and to pinpoint and track the location of each vehicle via satellite. In the 15 years since that launch, Qualcomm has shipped nearly 500,000 commercial units to businesses in 39 countries on 4 continents. In the U.S. alone, more than 1,600 fleets use the system, and the OmniTrax Network Management Center in San Diego processes more than 7 million data transactions every day. The OmniTrax spread spectrum technology provided a technological foundation for future Cdma networks, and its profits gave Qualcomm the financial freedom to fund development and commercialization of Qualcomm's next big thing, Cdma digital cell phone networks.
Then from there, that already was a Cdma system, and the concept of using it for cellular popped up.
In the fall of 1985, Jacobs first suggested the use of Cdma for personal communications during a drive with one of Qualcomm's leading engineers, Klein Gilhausen, from Los Angeles to San Diego. He asked Gilhausen to look into it further, and the resulting work formed the basis for Qualcomm's first Cdma patent.
Klein Gilhausen came and talked to me about it probably in 86, 87. And I told him all the things that were wrong with practical application, and he and others, including Irwin, of course, found ways around it and solved the problem. And then we started building hardware and did our first demonstration, as I recall, in 89.
Even though Qualcomm could demonstrate its technology's clear superiority, it ran up against entrenched competition from makers of networks based on existing technologies. It was a major selling job.
This was a technology, Cdma, that was very hard to understand, even harder to explain. It was clearly one that had better performance, particularly in a multipath environment and especially at higher speeds. Irwin understood that clearly, but it was very hard to get the rest of the community to just embrace it straight out.
All of the powerful established technology wireless entities in the world wanted us at the FCC to order a certain standard for communication, and then there was this inventor who wanted us to just give him a chance to be in business. We said, you know, we've thought about this very, very carefully. Our ignorance is so vast that we feel that it would be going beyond even the standards of Washington for us to be imposing some kind of rule against Irwin Jacobs, whoever he might be. If he can invent something, he ought to have a crack at it. And I want to say once and for all, Irwin caused the confusion in the wireless industry. It was not me. I did not do it. It's his fault. This confusion is also known as innovation. It is also known as creative destruction. It is also known as creativity. It is what makes America great.
I think that one of Irwin's great traits was that he recognized this very early on in Qualcomm, and he projected ahead where this was very complicated technology, the Cdma, you know.
He had the vision to see where telecommunications was going, to see where satellite communications was going, to see the importance of Cdma, and put it all together.
They had sprung Cdma on the wireless world, and this was a world that was not prepared to accept innovation, and certainly not that technology. And this is one of the cases where it never would have happened but for what Irwin did. And lest you think that that's a small achievement, let me just tell you that you were fighting the fiercest of forces, and Irwin somehow managed to prevail against almost all of them except maybe the European Commission.
While initially shut out of the European market, Jacobs scoured the world for countries which had not yet deployed cell phone systems on a large scale. Even before Cdma was deployed commercially in the U.S. market, South Korea seized on the technology and made it a cornerstone of the country's ambitions to become a wireless powerhouse.
The joint development contract was signed by my predecessor 1 year before I did, but it was exploratory, only $2 million contract. The one I signed was over $20 million. Qualcomm is unknown in Korea, so risking $20 million into one unknown company was really big risk for the country. Korea was the very first country in the world to accept the Cdma as a national standard. You don't have any other technology in Korea, no GSMs, no TDMAs. 100% of Cdma.
Because of entrenched competition for more widespread wireless technologies, Qualcomm had to do more than just innovate.
Well, that is, of course, the most exciting part of the business. If you have an idea, you can develop it, and then actually it becomes useful to people.
They were building handsets, they were building chips that go in the handsets. They still are building chips, and they're better than anybody's, and they've got the bulk of the market on that. They were building the infrastructure for the carriers to put out, to receive the signals and deploy them. They were bidding and acquiring spectrum, mainly outside the country, but also in the U.S., and that was partly to help get systems in foreign countries, and they were working with others in some various collaborations in order to actually build carrier systems abroad. And they were funding a lot of it, and this was essentially a soup to nuts operation.
Most analysts believe that protecting Qualcomm's intellectual property was one of Jacobs' key achievements in the 1990s, building a portfolio of protected innovations that would guarantee the company licensing royalties on all future products that are based on Cdma wireless technology.
One of the things Irwin did understand, I believe, is the importance of patents right from the beginning, and the importance of building on some foundation of strength. These Cdma patents are being leveraged extremely well, and I think they're extremely valuable. It's almost like Irwin has the patents on air travel, and everything else doesn't work as well.
It was not something we expected when we first began to look at the idea and develop it. One always has hopes. Gee whiz, this sounds very good. Perhaps we'll convince some people in the industry to make use of it. The fact now that the entire world is accepting Cdma for their next generation of communications is just great as far as we're concerned.
Jacobs worked and traveled tirelessly around the world to promote Cdma as a global standard for the next generation of cell phones, and he succeeded with international agencies greenlighting 3 Cdma modes, or so-called third-generation 3G networks. Cdma 2000 evolved directly from Qualcomm's second-generation Cdma, a wider bandwidth variant called WCDMA, initially standardized in Europe as a next-generation successor to GSM, the most widely used second-generation wireless technology, which was based on time division multiple access technology, and a third variant called TD-SCDMA, now being developed largely in China. All 3 versions are based on Qualcomm Cdma technology and patents.
Other area that people have been, of course, concerned about is, can I use one phone wherever I might be throughout the world? And there have been different standards. There will always be different standards. We have 1 billion people pretty much on 2G right now in several different frequency bands. They will slowly migrate to 3G. However, by that time 3G itself will continue to evolve, so nobody can depend on always having the same standard. The way to solve that problem is to have the capability embedded in the chip in the phone, so as a subscriber one need not worry about the system to which you're connected. It will just automatically be picked up by the phone and operate properly.
The importance of Qualcomm's patent protection strategy became clear when arch-rival Ericsson decided to settle long-standing patent infringement claims in a deal that confirmed Qualcomm's ownership of the core technology in return for the San Diego company agreeing to sell its wireless infrastructure division to the Swedish giant. Again, Jacobs got the credit, and Qualcomm shareholders reaped the reward.
Really opened the floodgates, and it made Qualcomm, certainly that year, the #1 company on the NASDAQ. This was the case where he made a compromise. It was actually a better compromise for Qualcomm. It may not have been technically the ultimate thing he wanted, but in the final analysis, it was okay. It not only protected the downside, but it also improved the upside dramatically. He also understood the importance of striking deals. In fact, it's one of the things that Qualcomm has been remarkably good at, both in terms of its licensing and in dealing with other parties.
Among his most important deals to date, Jacobs negotiated with officials in Beijing and won access for Qualcomm's technology in the fastest-growing and largest cell phone market in the world. Now, with Qualcomm's 3G technology up and running in the U.S. on 2 of the largest cell phone networks, Verizon and Sprint, Jacobs and his company are gearing up for their next offensive, wireless broadband access to the Internet.
The experience, again, where 3G has been launched, and again, there are 60 million people out there using it at this point, 62 or so, is that indeed this ability to download different applications is turning out to be very popular. And so some people use it for playing games, some people use it for their business use. Ringtones have always been popular, but that's not enough to drive 3G clearly. And the key surprise, I think, has been the fact that people have been willing to pay some significant extra amount per month for the video downloads, for the video clips. And so in a sense, maybe if you're looking at revenue issues, that may turn out to be one of the killer applications.
3G phones already have a version of it, but Qualcomm's data-optimized Cdma will allow business travelers and others to use their PDAs or laptops on the run to surf the net at high speeds.
That supports data rates of up to 2.4 megabits per second, very high data rates. The number of transistors on a piece of silicon just keep doubling every year and a half or so. The power goes down, the cost goes down, you can do all kinds of wonderful things. That's why the cell phones are becoming so powerful. And if you look at the chip we now put in a cell phone, the digital chip, it used to be, actually we used several chips just to make Cdma work, because Cdma is indeed exceedingly complicated to make all the right things happen. And then it got down to one chip. Now it's a fraction of one chip, and most of those transistors are now going into computing, or into GPS receivers, multi-megapixel cameras, video coding, decoding, but a lot of that is the computing part. And so when you kind of say, okay, what's going to be happening over the next several years, I think the mobile devices, these portable devices we carry around with us, we feel uncomfortable ever going without them.
While the initial market for high-speed web data access over CDMA networks is currently centered on entertainment, such as video clips and data transmission for businesses, Jacobs says the technology will also bring the broadband web at reasonable cost to people who are today bypassed by the Internet revolution.
Well, one of the very exciting aspects is we think it's going to help in solving the digital divide issue, where, for example, students in rural areas and poor areas will be able to have a cell phone with a reasonable size screen, a high data rate connection to the internet, something that's low enough cost that they can not only use in school but take home with them. We think it's an important social responsibility as well as a business opportunity. Good afternoon. How are you all doing?
Jacobs' admirers and colleagues generally credit him with business instincts and skills that are rare among technology innovators.
He's a brilliant and innovative scientist, and he was a great teacher. Indeed, he continues to be a great teacher, but he has a flair for entrepreneurship and for business.
Leadership, innovation, brilliant ideas across the board. He also was capable of, before any of the rest of us, I think, any of the rest of the engineers, to fully understand business and financial details. And so, he's a Renaissance man. He can cover a great deal of territory and learn very fast.
He and Joan were at our house once, and I was very proudly showing him an Edison phonograph, which I own. And I was opening it up and showing him the mechanics of it, etc. And he was interested, but he asked me one question, and it just floored me. He said to me, "How long did Edison have the market, and why did he lose it?" I don't know of any other engineer that would ask that question. And I think the success of Linkabit and Qualcomm is because Irwin asked questions like that.
Anyone who's seen Irwin speak knows his trademark is to hold up Qualcomm's latest cell phone, okay? But when it comes to Irwin, it's not just one product, but hundreds of products that he's responsible for.
While Qualcomm's success has been stunning, the Jacobs legacy goes well beyond Qualcomm to the roughly 100 companies in San Diego that trace their roots, like Qualcomm, to Linkabit.
It was over many generations where companies spawn companies spawn companies. I think we counted 7 generations that are full-blooded Linkabit companies. It's interesting that when you get that kind of critical mass in a community, it attracts other companies to town. So we have many multinational companies that have come here to share in that innovative technical resource that the Linkabit family of companies has created. And then if you look at the companies around those hardcore companies, you can add another 100 that provide telecom-related services, other kinds of services. I'm president of the San Diego Telecom Council, which is San Diego's Telecom Industry Association. We have 250 member and sponsor companies. And you wonder, where did those all come from? Well, that explains it.
If Linkabit is the father of telecom, probably UCSD is the other parent, but Irwin is the parent of Linkabit. And it is because of Irwin and his leadership that this town has what it has in terms of an economic base.
Nowhere is that presence more obvious than on the La Jolla campus of UCSD, and especially in engineering, where Jacobs' early influence on the faculty became even more profound as Linkabit flourished.
We really put some demands on UCSD, which, with great results, needless to say. We needed more engineers than they could produce in a year. I mean, we were growing much more rapidly at that point. I think this caused, I think Dick Atkinson was involved then, and the vision was seen, and Irwin had a great influence on growing the engineering department to produce more engineers.
When we first came back in 1966 to the campus, it was brand new. And actually, the name of the engineering department at that time was, if I get it right, Applied Electrophysics. And so it had a little bit more of a physics flair. But it's been great to watch it develop over the years, to see how this campus has grown, how the students have continued to improve, the faculty has continued to improve, the research has continued to improve, and now clearly the facilities are improving, and the difference that it's making to this community and indeed to the country, the state, the world. It's really been an exciting period for us to just watch all of this happen and, of course, have the opportunity to participate as well.
Since endowing UCSD's first chair in 1981, Jacobs and his wife Joan have become the university's largest individual donors, committing $15 million in 1998 when the engineering school was renamed the Jacobs School of Engineering, and in 2003 with their $110 million donation to the school.
One of the areas that we've been most proud of is the ability to support a very capable group of undergraduates and another group of graduate students. Call them Jacobs Scholars and Fellows. But it's been kind of fun to see those students come in here, and I think we're now approaching we're in our third year of that program and going into the fourth year. So it's one of the areas that we're most excited about. We will continue to support that, and then ultimately that will be handled through endowment. So a very special part of this. Another important part, of course, has to do not just having excellent students, but having excellent faculty. And so part of the monies will also go to help support the dean in his discretionary use of funds to help attract and support additional faculty here at UCSD. And so we think that's another very key component. And finally, we're entering another phase here at the university and establishing another professional school, School of Management. And one of the ideas of that school, and you can still hear my Boston accent, one of the ideas of that school is to focus in on technical education, and a good percentage of the students will most likely have a technical background. And so it's important to be able to have a bonding between the School of Engineering and School of Management. So part of the funding will also cover several joint faculty appointments.
This is the largest gift in UCSD's history, and it is one of the largest gifts ever made to an engineering school in the nation. Most people like to think of UCSD as having been launched by Roger Revelle, and it reflects Roger Revelle's personality. I would say that Irwin and Joan have had at least as large an impact on the personality of this campus as Roger Revelle did, because of course that they have sustained their impact for over 30 years, 30 some odd years.
When I became president, one of my first initiatives was an expansion of the engineering programs of the University of California, and the stimulus behind that was Irwin Jacobs, and his arguments were so cogent that he convinced me, and in turn the faculty and the Board of Regents, that we should take on that expansion.
Through the support of Irwin and Joan over the years, we have been able to recruit the very best faculty and students and to move engineering at UCSD into the top tier of engineering schools worldwide. Irwin's personal leadership is also directly responsible for two jewels in UCSD's crown, namely the Center for Wireless Communications and the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology.
I think I first heard about Cal IT Squared, or the intent for having these research and development institutes, back at a meeting of the President's Council, I believe, Engineering Council, up in Oakland. And it sounded like a very exciting idea, and then we heard more about it and the governor's plans, and it sounded like it could be, and indeed I'm sure it will be, a transformational event having that institute, Cal IT Squared, here in San Diego.
If it wasn't for Irwin and for Qualcomm, we might not exist as an organization. In fact, when the governor made his initial challenge to the UC system to put $100 million into each of the capital programs of the four institutes, he did so only if they could come back with a 2-to-1 match. And at the time, that seemed rather daunting because this was after the peak in the NASDAQ. And in fact, we've created this whole institute all the way down in the stock market. But the one person who really understood and believed was Irwin, and he not only gave us our grub stake along with the people of Qualcomm with the first $15 million gift, but he used the opportunity of sharing the podium with the President of the United States to launch this and to issue a challenge to the rest of the corporate world.
I was at a meeting in Northern California, and the President Clinton, was there talking about the digital divide, and we had decided that we would make a major contribution to help solve problems of the digital divide, and announced our gift of $15 million at that time toward Cal IT Squared.
The Institute was announced in December 2000, promising an interdisciplinary approach to developing the future of the Internet. For Jacobs, it was a reminder of an earlier time.
When I went to MIT, they had there what was called the Research Laboratory of Electronics, and that was an opportunity. You didn't have to think of what your research topic was, go off, send off for a grant request, get it back, and then be able to work on it in 1 or 2 people at a time. It was a large blanket grant, and as a result you could get lots of researchers together, not necessarily know what might be coming out of it, but a lot of great things did come out of that. It's a great formula. It's one that's been largely abandoned. And so the chance when the governor raised this possibility of allowing the different campuses to compete, to have these major centers on them, that resonated with me. And so I'm very pleased that UCSD did lead the effort to get Cal IT Squared here, and I don't think any of us have a good feeling at this point what will come out of it, but you give people opportunities, and indeed great things do happen.
In May 2002, Jacobs was on hand for the groundbreaking on Cal IT Square's 260,000 square foot headquarters building at UCSD. When completed in late 2004, the structure will boast one of the most advanced communications infrastructures anywhere, thanks in part to novel Qualcomm technologies like the high data rate infrastructure that was deployed at the engineering school long before it was rolled out commercially.
Qualcomm 3 years ago put the first of the antennas for the high bandwidth cellular internet up on top of the Jacobs School here. And so even though Verizon just rolled out that commercial service 2 weeks ago for the first time in the United States here in San Diego, for 3 years we've been living in Cal IT Squared in that world of essentially what I call a cable modem in the sky. Anywhere you are, you have as much bandwidth as you would if you had a cable modem at home.
That technology allowed researchers from Cal IT Squared to develop innovative applications such as the Cyber Shuttle, a regular campus bus service that allows riders to surf the web on their laptops through a Wi-Fi network that links them to the web through Qualcomm's high data rate technology. This high-speed web access, even with the bus traveling at 65 miles per hour, was operating long before the first commercial deployment of third-generation wireless systems in the U.S.
And it's that ability to discover the future by living in technologies that will take 3 to 5 years, in this case 3 years from our first antenna to the commercial rollout, to get to the market. That's really at the heart of what we do.
There is another passion, of course, and that is the Jacobs' not only support for, but personal love for arts and music, theater. And even back in those days, before they were substantial contributors to the extent that they are today, they were always participating in the various music series, quartets that would come in. You know, San Diego was a Navy town. It's not a disparaging Navy, but it was a small Navy town, relatively speaking, to what many of the academics who came from major cities expected in the way of arts and availability of theater and things of this nature, and it's made this fantastic progress.
The contributions of Irwin and Joan Jacobs have benefited organizations including the San Diego Opera, the San Diego Symphony, La Jolla Playhouse, Museum of Photographic Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and countless other cultural institutions.
We typically, in our philanthropy, look for opportunities to support causes where we can also be active. We don't like to just give money.
The dollar value of the Jacobs contributions and benevolence to San Diego is greater than that of the Scripps family, and I think it may very well turn out to be greater in real dollars than the contributions of two generations of Scripps's.
Despite his sustained success as an academic, entrepreneur, and technologist, to the longtime colleagues who spoke at his 70th birthday symposium, it was Irwin Jacobs' personal attributes that engendered the highest accolades.
He's upbeat in the face of challenges everywhere, no matter how difficult the journey seems to get. I've never seen him externally exhibit anything but upbeatness in the cause. And above all, he's a real leader of people. And you see that throughout the company in terms of how it's rated, in terms of its productivity. And it all traces back to Irwin and his quiet, efficient way of getting things done.
Everything I've seen him do from then until now has been different from what other people are doing, but he seems to be incredibly good at finding out what in fact are the important risks to take.
Harvey White says Irwin Jacobs taught him a very important business lesson.
You don't compromise in those things that you really believe in. You can define the core values that you have, whether they're the technical values or the business values. You don't compromise those. You can compromise the periphery as long as they don't compromise the core values. There would be no Cdma today had he been willing to compromise. There wouldn't be any. And this School of Engineering and the impact in this community and in the world at large would not survive, would not be here unless he had that kind of dedication.
The scale with which the Jacobs have contributed not only to the university but to San Diego and to arts and to charity organizations at home, that just doesn't come, plus creation of all those jobs.
Without a doubt, San Diego would not be what it is today at all without Irwin Jacobs.
So we're celebrating the 70th. Right now, it's interesting to look back, but I think the great excitement indeed is looking forward.
For all his reputation as a telecom visionary, philanthropist, and entrepreneur, Irwin Jacobs is also known for business ethics and balancing his work and family life. He and wife Joan raised 4 sons, Hal, Paul, Gary, and Jeff, all of whom continue to live in San Diego with their wives and combined 10 grandchildren, who are known to regularly drop by their grandfather's office to say hi. All 4 sons have also worked at Qualcomm in a variety of jobs, and 2 still do. Jeff, president of global operations for the company, and Paul, a Qualcomm executive vice president and president of its wireless and internet group. While both have been groomed for leadership roles in the company, Irwin Jacobs shows no sign of slowing down or relinquishing his job as CEO anytime soon.
We have a ways to go, so there's always something else to be done. So you don't spend too much of your time thinking back, you're always thinking forward, what more can we do?